This morning I woke up and I had a line in my head. And I sat up and the line was, all your intuitions are true. I thought, oh, that's a nice thing to wake up to. And, when I started to sort of come to, I wondered, where is that from? All your intuitions are true. It turns out it's a David White poem. Big surprise, I have a small obsession. Almost every time I'm in charge of whatever this is, bulletin, David White seems to work his way in, or Mary Oliver. And I realize it's from a poem that he writes about the death of his own mother. And I thought, oh, okay, this is a fitting day for such an intuition to come up from the underworld. So I thought I'd read this poem just to start us off. And in honor of the, you don't realize how repressed you are until someone asks you to stand up and dance like a mother. So anyway, he writes a letter which is sort of it's that sort of perfect combination of sweetness and darkness at the same time. So it's called a farewell letter. She wrote me a letter after her death, and I remember a kind of happy light falling on the envelope as I sat by the rose tree on her old bench at the back door. So surprised by its arrival, wondering what she would say, looking up before I could even open it, and laughing to myself in silent expectation. Dear son, it is time for me to leave you. I am afraid that the words you are used to hearing are no longer mine to give. They are gone and mingled back in the world where it is no longer in my power to be their first original author, nor their last loving bearer. You can hear motherly words of affection now only from your own mouth. And only when you speak them to those who stand motherless before you. As for me, I must forsake adulthood and be bound gladly to a new childhood. You must understand this apprenticeship demands of me an elemental innocence from everything I have ever held in my hands. I know your generous soul is well able to let me go. You will in the end be happy to know my God was true, and I find myself, after loving you all for so long, in the wide, infinite mercy of being mothered myself. P.S. All your intuitions are true. I think perhaps one reason why this came up from the underworld into my conscious self was that there is a way of knowing that is deeper than who you think you are. There's a way of knowing that is deeper than who you think you are. One word for that is intuition. There are probably 1,000 other words that can be used. And I think the way this weaves into my theme for this month, and even Joseph Campbell, the theme of change, is that one way of describing the big changes in life is moving from the zone of who you think you are and what you think you know to this other way of knowing, this deeper way of knowing, or as you heard in that quotation from Joseph Campbell, to the zone unknown, or as you symbolized in your act of dancing, if you weren't repressed like me, where the mother, the great mother, leaves room for the unknown. That's the culmination of that creation story. Room for the unknown. What else is mothering and birthing than making room for the unknown? So, I know Mother's Day is a made-up holiday, meant to sell you things. A day when children worldwide feel obligated to go to church. But this isn't a church, so maybe it doesn't apply. But I don't know. There's perhaps, I often think about it as a guilt-induced holiday, but there is obviously something missing in our culture, and that's the feminine, that's the sacred feminine. And one image for everything I'm trying to describe in terms of change, probably the most elemental image is birth. From the zone unknown into the known. And even the whole wheel, look at the wheel for a minute. Turn back over to the hero's journey or the heroine's journey. Departure, initiation, and return, what else is that other than the birth of something in the world? And one of the things that has become curious to me as I've been thinking about this series, and also from the conversation, the pre-conversation last week, before last week's sort of main event, whatever this is right away, as soon as we start talking about the hero's journey, we're beginning to talk about the feminine. And apparently that's what you were talking about this morning. So I want to share two stories today. One that tends to be more masculine oriented, and the other tends to be more feminine oriented. I just want to say, whatever we mean by the hero's journey can be expressed in different ways. And it's important to pay attention to the sensitivities in the ways in which the female journey is archetypally and symbolically different than the masculine journey. Not that we don't also have both within, because if you can't tell, Jung is always knocking on my door. And of course, he gave the world the animus and the anima, the masculine and the feminine that live within all people. So it's a little bit of both and, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And take a look at this map again. And in a way, I'm going around the wheel. Last week, I tried to talk a little bit about departure, and then I realized it was 10 after, and I had to stop. So I'm taking it from there, and probably this week I'm more oriented in the initiation, and maybe by the end of this month we'll get to the return. And I'll try to use different ways of talking about these things. But I want to say something that I think sort of maybe as a caveat that maybe I could have said last week, but I forgot or didn't think of it. And that is, first of all, the map is not the same as the territory. And I just need to say that. The map is just the map. The territory is wildly unique, individually and also sometimes culturally. The map just says something is a little like this. And some of you in the talk back were like, yeah, but my personal story isn't quite like, yes, I know. Neither is mine. The map is not the same as the territory. It's a metaphor, it's a symbol, but it's an important one. Maps do give us a sense of where are we situated in this wild unfolding. It gives us signposts or pointers or road signs that say sometimes you're lost, and that's okay, and other times here's the way back onto the path. But I just want to say the map is not the same as the territory. So I'm not trying to, cram your life or even what's going on in our culture, run everything through this simple grid. I'm just simply saying it's a little like this. The other is, why talk about this now in the 21st century? Because, well, I don't know when this was published, in 1949? I made that up. Okay. At no other point in human history was someone like Joseph Campbell, and it could have been anybody, and probably was many voices, at no point in human history did someone come along and start to look for patterns like this. That is really important to notice. Because people were separated by oceans, we didn't have airplanes, you would bump into maybe one or two cultures or peoples or religions that were unlike you, but not this giant smorgasbord. So it's very important right now to wake up to the reality that the world is massively different than it was 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, just by virtue of exchange. The global village is a brand new thing in terms of human beings' conscious awareness of such a thing. Does that make sense? So this is a very exciting time to be alive. And just to take something like this, the hero's journey, saying there is a monomyth out there, or a couple of monomyths, that tell us what it's like to grow up, that tell us about the major stages of life, that are transcultural, trans-religious, trans-spiritual, is brand new. So the reason why people don't run and immediately adopt it and say, oh yes, is because that's not how people are. They put on the brakes and say, whoa, 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 this sounds a little scary. Now, maybe you're not so scared of this because you've been around the wheel a few times. You've gone through this departure, initiation, and return a few times, so it's not as frightening once you've gone around the wheel. But I'm just saying, culturally speaking, this is a very great time to be alive, even though it's scary as hell. So it's a time of upheaval and renewal at the same time. So that's enough of what I want to say about that. So the invitation is for you to study this map and ask yourself, is this true? And I'm not even getting into all the details. The call to adventure, the refusal, the meeting the mentor, the crossing the threshold, the test allies and enemies, and so forth and so on around the wheel. I can't even get into all of them unless I were to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, they're numbered for me. 12, a full year. A full year. Well, that's a good idea, actually. By the end, you'd be like, seriously, you have a problem. Okay. So let's talk about two stories. The first is called La Loba, or the wolf. It has several other variations. And I first came across this little story in a lovely book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, which, if you're going to read Joseph Campbell, should be required reading. Maybe it should be required reading, period, now that I think of it. Especially if you're sort of bored with the ordinary books like the Bible or something. I don't know why I said that. I mean, it could have been anything. It just popped into my head. So, in this story, it's a story of La Loba. And what is she like? La Loba lives in the desert, in kind of the zone unknown kind of territories. You might see her thumbing a ride on Route 66. You might see her helping illegal immigrants cross the border. You might see her smuggling something, some contraband, from one part of the world to another part of the world. She might live in the part of town that your nice liberal selves would say, I'm totally fine with that, but you wouldn't really want to go there. Yeah, this is where she lives, and she's a little bit mangy and a little bit plump. It might have a mole here or there, and she might cackle and laugh and sort of make a scene. This is what La Loba is like. And La Loba, what is her full-time job? Her full-time job is to collect bones. She goes around collecting bones, all kinds of bones. Will do bird bones. Excellent. Gather those up. She might collect rabbit bones. Why not? Little mouse bones, those are cute. Collect those up. She takes them back to her cave, but her favorite kind of bone to collect is the wolf bone. And if you were ever to lose sight of your life and start wandering yourself, she might take an interest in you. And this is where things get very interesting. And she might lure you in her own mysterious and wild ways a little closer to her territory, to her own cave. And in this cave, what she does is very carefully and slowly, with no rush, because she's got other things to do, she wants to arrange these bones on the floor, kind of put them back together again. Say, oh, yeah, this looks like a femur. We'll move that back into the femur place. And this looks like a little tail. This looks like a jaw. Oh, this jaw belongs with this. She arranges these bones on the floor of the cave, which I'm sure you were doing last week. And when the bones are finished, especially the wolf bones, when the bones are finished, and she realized she's got all the pieces, she went out of her way to find the teeth. She puts those canines back in. And she begins to sing a song. And it takes her a while to find the right tune. She sings for a while, stops singing, tends the fire, moves the foot a little bit, sings another song, tends the fire, moves the foot. Until she hits the right melody line, the right song, this deep song that comes from the underworld. The deepest song of one's life, she somehow taps into and begins to come out of her mouth. And what happens to those bones? They begin to rattle. And they shimmer and they shake. And it doesn't take very long before that skeleton, that shell of a wolf begins to stand up and gain her footing and arch her back by the fire. And as La Loba sings, sure enough, flesh begins to form, reconstitute. And not only flesh, but muscle and skin and hair and the tongue. And pretty soon, you have a full-fledged, wild and untamed wolf at the mouth of the cave. And she bolts back into the wild world. And on her way out, she gives little La Loba a wink. Okay? Story number 2. Story number 2 is a story of a young prince of some sort who goes away to become a warrior. See how they're already very different? The masculine and the feminine weaving their way in the world. So there's a story of a young man. He goes out to become a warrior, and he has to learn how to become a warrior, which means how to work with weapons, which are very important. There's a great Irish saying, you don't give a weapon to a boy who doesn't know how to dance. Which, I don't know, that just popped into my head. That's just like an incredible way of saying, whatever we mean by weapons, they're not to be just given out willy-nilly because you've come of age. There's something else more sacred that's going on. So anyway, this young boy goes away. And he's away, of course, from his father for a very, very long time. And he's in a very intense school. And he's going to learn all the weapons. And he's told by his teacher there are 5 weapons. And I don't remember them all right now. Maybe one is a stone, one is a knife, one is a sword, one is an arrow, and one is the spear. 5 weapons. And it's a very long initiation process to go through learning the skills of how and when to use these weapons. And sure enough, at the end of this very, very long process, he feels like he's the master of these 5 weapons and is ready to go home. And his teacher says, it's true. You are ready. You're ready, my son. You may go back home. And he's very excited. He gets to go back home to his father and take his rightful place as this young warrior. And he sets off, but his teacher says, make sure you go around the forest because the monster with the sticky hair lives in that forest. And of course, sort of like Adam and Eve, don't eat from that fruit. You know exactly what's going to happen. So he thinks to himself, I just went through warrior training. I have the 5 weapons. Of course, I'll take the shortcut. So he gets to the edge of the forest and he swallows hard and he goes out into the darkness, into the zone unknown. And it doesn't take him very long where he hears rustling in the woods and he hears the foot pounding. And sure enough, the monster with the sticky hair is standing before him. And he's not afraid. He's well trained. And the monster with the sticky hair is looking at him and he looks at the monster. And he takes out his first weapon, the stone, and hurls it, and it gets stuck in his hair. He's like, oh, okay, well, I see that's why they call him monster with the sticky hair. But I have 4 more weapons, and you can see where this is going. He goes one by one. He takes the knife, tries to stab, gets stuck in his hair. He takes, goes through all 5, the arrows and the spear, until he has nothing left, and the monster comes after him anyway. He says, well, maybe this is what the teacher meant. And he leaps on the monster, and he starts to punch, and he gets his right arm stuck in there, and he gets his left arm stuck in there. He says, that's okay, I have 2 feet, and he kicks, and then he gets his other foot stuck in there, and he finally goes to headbutt him, and his head is stuck inside the monster with the sticky hair. And the monster is laughing at this point. And he says, now I will eat you. And the boy is very still. And all of a sudden he thinks to himself, maybe there's something else going on. And he says, go ahead and eat me. No problem. But know that I have a lightning bolt in my belly. And if you eat me, this lightning bolt will go off and tear you to bits. The monster says, yeah, but you'll die too. And the boy says, yes, I know. And the monster thinks to himself, wow, I've never met such a clever boy in my life. I wonder if this story is true or not. And he's so enthralled with this idea of the lightning in the belly that he takes the boy out of his sticky hair, sets him on the ground and says, you can go on your way. Now, this is a very old story. This is a Buddhist story that's pre-Buddha. And, now I'm already in the measure of interpretation. Maybe I should just let it sit out there. But there's something very interesting about what seems to be going on in this story. Who you think you are, even your skills, your weapons, your ideas, your persona, so forth and so on, at a certain point, all gets used up and stuck in the hair of a monster. And then you're forced to go where? In the story, the boy is forced to go within. Is there some kind of 6th weapon, which the Buddha calls the weapon of knowledge, which we were already hinting at this morning? Knowledge and insight that comes from within. But you don't ever really go on that journey until you've exhausted all of your resources. Have I made sense? Okay. So here are 2 stories that can just float around sort of in the ether for a few minutes. And I want to talk about this pattern of initiation. And these 2 stories seem related in the sense of initiation, in that the story begins in La Loba when the woman's bones are scattered out across the earth. And maybe, you'd have to tell me if this is true, maybe there's something of the feminine story that another journey begins when you are spent, when you've been consumed by the world, or when the world has consumed you in some way and scattered your bones to the far winds. That's when La Loba takes an interest in you. And in a similar, though I think the stream of it is a little different, the story begins after the boy has used all of the sacred weapons he's painstakingly learned how to use. Then there's a kind of descent. There's a kind of descent to the inner realms that happens only when you've spent all your resources. And that's the beginning of the initiation journey. And if you look at the hero's journey on the opposite side, what are you dealing with? Something around crossing the threshold, tests and allies, and approaching the innermost cave. See that sitting at the very bottom of the initiation story? Entering the inmost cave. That's in La Loba's story. Okay. So I made a list of sort of 6 or 7 patterns that I want to name briefly. 6 or 7 patterns of severance, leaving one world and entering the zone unknown, that I think are worth just sort of stating in plain terms. One pattern of severance is that human beings, men or women, as they begin this deeper journey, are done with social or cultural identifications. Something about them says, I'm done fulfilling this particular role of my life. And I'm ready to move to some sort of zone. Do you remember in that poem when, in the mother's voice, she's letting go of a certain adulthood? Now, I know this is a sort of the most dramatic form of that, because the poem is about leaving the realm of adulthood and the initiation of death itself. But in a less dramatic form, think about your own life in these terms. When have you fulfilled a certain role in your life and then something about it felt over? Something about it, you reached the limits of that particular cultural identification, and something drew you to the zone unknown. Listen to how Joseph Campbell puts it. He says, that which has to be faced is somehow profoundly familiar to the unconscious, though unknown, surprisingly, and even surprising to the conscious personality, makes itself known. What was formerly meaningful may become strangely emptied of value. What was formerly meaningful may become strangely emptied of value. It's like the mystery luring you to the zone unknown. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, something of a life crisis happens. Something of life crisis. Now, as soon as I say that, people think, oh, you mean divorce, death, job loss. Yes, but it also could be much more lovely, like you fall in love with the wrong person. Any of that. A life crisis is something that disrupts who you thought you were in the world. Even who you have made yourself out to be in the world. Nothing like love to disrupt that. Has anyone in this room fallen in love with the wrong person? Okay. Has anyone ever fallen in love with the right person? You know? Yeah, right. That's what I say. Yeah, there's something of who you thought. It's like when all your weapons are used up. And you're no longer sort of in control in the way you were once in control. So, again, I'm just naming these patterns that seem to pull us deeper into this realm of initiation and the underside of the journey. So, you're done with social and cultural. You're done with social or cultural identifications. Number 2, there's some kind of life crisis. Number 3, and I think this is a very sort of mysterious element, it feels much more like a call. Some element of it feels like a call. This is what Joseph Campbell is describing as the call to adventure, which sounds like very like military, the call to adventure, sort of like Braveheart or something. But I think what he really is communicating is something far more subtle. That yes, you might be done with cultural forms in the way you have. Yes, there might be some kind of life crisis, but the call, some sort of mysterious pull, is luring you into the zone unknown. And you start to get curious about that. It's when something like your intuitions start to be a compass in your life, rather than ordinary forms of what's rational and a good idea and what your parents have told you or what your culture says. This is the way things are. You don't understand that sort of thing. You begin to follow that compass that seems to be on the underside of the conscious self. Another example, by the way, or another way of putting this, is that one loses faith, and it could be sort of religious faith, but one loses faith in their current stories or convictions. And by the way, you can hang on to your current stories for a very long time until everyone around you is tired of hearing them. And then one day you wake up and you're like, I'm tired of hearing it. And something of the story you've been telling yourself and even the convictions that you've been clinging to suddenly don't have that kind of power, and you slip into the zone unknown. Or what was that line that was so awesome? Leaving room as the mother leaves room for the unknown. I wish I could do that move. Like Number four, another pattern that seems to be happening in the underside of the initiation journey is that this is kind of a fancy word, but I don't mean it to be. Something about you starts to wake up to a transpersonal commitment or dedication. It no longer becomes just about your personal waking up. A little like what the meditation was starting to hint at, or not even hint, be more direct about. In other words, the simple way of saying it is you begin to say, this isn't about my personal waking up. This has to be about something larger. This has to be about serving some larger purpose than just my own well-being or happiness. If that's not there, according to Joseph Campbell, then it's not a real initiation journey. Then it's kind of like a grand self-help project. And at the end, you're like, man, I really helped myself. Which, there's a time and a place for that. But the deeper call is a transpersonal dedication, where you begin to be sensitive not only to the people in your immediate vicinity, but perhaps your community and your culture and the world and the waterways and Mother Earth herself. Some sort of transpersonal dedication begins to wake up. My life has to be about something bigger than my 401k. Make sense? By the way, it's great that you have 401k. I don't mean that. We do accept donations in a variety of means. Okay, number 5. I'm almost done with these. Number 5. There's some kind of appearance of a guide. And you can see these in really both of the stories. But let's take La Loba. So if part of the feminine journey, at least in this myth, is there's something about your bones being scattered out across the world. The appearance of a guide, and it can be, in this story, I think this is an inner guide. But it could be someone that comes to you for a while in an external form. Some sort of teacher, some sort of guide-like figure, but probably not, famous ones or something like that. Usually they come in sort of through the side entrance of your life. And they begin, like in the La Loba story, to collect the bones and to put them in the cave. And it just seems to be the case that there's some kind of aid. If you're willing to wander into the zone unknown, then sure enough, you're met by a guide or two. A teacher, That's where we get mentor. That's why I started off with the story. Was it last week when I was talking about Telemachus, or a few weeks ago? A few weeks ago? Okay, so like Telemachus, lovely story, opening story of the Odyssey. Telemachus is on the beach, and mentor shows up. That's where we get the phrase mentor. It's just an old man who was too old to go off to war, and he begins to tell Telemachus, all right, it's time for you to go on the bigger journey. Just when you think Telemachus is about to unravel and be totally lost, then a little voice from the side comes and says, and that doesn't have to be an external form. Jung says a guide appeared to him in the middle of his midlife crisis with Freud, an inner guide. I wish I could remember if Philemon or something like that, or Philemon. That's what he says, Philemon. For a while when I started reading Jung, I was like, who is this guy? And I realized after a while, it's an inner guide. It's something that he conjured up in his deep imagination. So the unconscious is a very mysterious place. But I just want to say, and maybe this is true in your own life, has someone or some inner voice ever begin to open up pathways you didn't see before? Joseph Campbell says that's part of the initiation journey. Number 6, 2 more. Number 6, part of the process here in the underworld is you begin to risk everything. If you don't like everything, and if that sounds too dramatic, there's a sense of serious risk. What is it a serious risk to in modern psychological terms? Your ego. Your ego thinks it's going to die because it's going to die. And you somehow, maybe through a guide, maybe through an inner voice, maybe through a variety of other means, are willing to take one more step on the path. But it feels as if you're going to risk everything. And your life is going to fall apart. I remember when I first started seeing my therapist, I said, I'm afraid my life is going to fall apart. I used much more colorful language than that. And he said, I'm here to make sure that happens. So that's a tiny bit of 2 things. It's a little bit of the appearance of a guide from the side, totally unexpected, because I thought a good therapist would say the opposite. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen. But he was much more in that moment like an initiation guide than trying to patch my ego back together again so I can just be a good old American. Okay? But it requires some sort of risk. Yeah. And just be honest, has anything you've ever done that's felt worthwhile been without risk? I mean, honestly, I doubt it. All right, number 7, and we're done. There's some element of relinquishing control. There's some element of relinquishing control, which is another way of saying the ego isn't in the driver's seat anymore. And it is the hard part. You know why AA is probably like the most helpful spirituality, if that's what you want to call it, is because that's how it begins. You can't even start without relinquishing control. And you can argue about whether or not there's a higher power, and you can get into a theological argument. Forget about theology. If you want to start the real process of initiation and change, you have to say, I'm not in control. And there's some kind of mystery at work. Okay. I'll end with these words from David White. The dark will be your womb tonight. The dark will be your womb tonight. Wait a minute, I want a light. This little light of mine, I want to see where I'm going. Too bad. Okay? The dark will be your womb tonight. The night will give you a horizon further than you can see. Wait a minute, I thought it was about seeing. No, there's some kind of horizon that goes further than your ability to see, than who you think you are in the world. So, the dark will be your womb tonight. The night will give you a horizon further than you can see. You must learn one thing. I'm glad we're getting right to it. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. The world was made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. Do you hear how he's leaving the zone of the known to the unknown? You must give up all these personas and worlds that you've worked so hard to manufacture and control. But they're not the ones to which you truly belong. He goes on, sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness, like being stuck in the hair of a sticky monster all alone, or to have your bones scattered out across the earth. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn anything or anyone that doesn't bring you alive is too small for you. And I think I would add right here that I think this line is said with heartbreak, not victory. Anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. Thanks.